On. Welcome back to another special edition of Rock Forever. We have an incredible guest today. He is one of the original guitarists of Genesis and has put out so many solo albums, continues to innovate the guitar world and bring us so much great music. Please welcome Steve Hackett.
Hi, Jay. How are you doing?
Oh, doing so well, Steve. Again, so great to see you. I know it's been a very prosperous year with 2 albums coming out, and we'll talk about that. But I know you talked recently about the first gig you did with Genesis, and you expected to get fired afterwards. Talk about what went wrong.
Oh, my God. Yeah, first gig I did with Genesis. I'd learned all these songs that they'd written, and I was using a particular fuzz box for the distortion. And when it came to the gig, that fuzz box was Tony Banks's. And so I needed to get a Marshall Super Fuzz, instead of which I was given another fuzz box that I ended up using, over the years, which was great. It was a Shaftesbury Duo fuzz. And I used that. But of course, for the sound check, everyone was playing fairly tamely and quietly. But because everyone opened up for the gig and this thing was feeding back like crazy, it was unfamiliar equipment. So I promptly forgot just about every single damn note that I'd learned. And it was the onstage equivalent of death by 1,000 cuts. I was so embarrassed, and I thought, it's all over. I've blown it. But they gave me another chance, and I stuck around for another 6 or 7 years.
Well, what great years they were. We love the high water mark of Selling England by the Pound, which is such an acclaimed album. Talk about what you think was firing on all cylinders, for that record, which really made it a special one.
Well, that one, I think maybe it was a tad more guitar-y than the other Genesis albums, which were more keyboard orientated in a way. I think because a lot of the stuff was written on the spot, we were writing pretty quickly, but we were doing a lot of shows. I was particularly happy with Dancing with the Moonlit Night, the opening track. I loved doing that, loved playing on that because it had hooks, it had a level of playing that we hadn't really experienced up to that point. Tricky time signatures, odd length bars, some tapping, some sweep picking, some octave jumps for me. Fantastic work by Tony with the Polotron choir. Wonderful drumming from Phil. Tricky stuff, and a very imaginative narrative type lyric from Peter Gabriel. Loved that one. And the other one that stands out to me in terms of being allowed to really let rip was Firth of Fifth, which has a much slower guitar solo on it. But it was a beautiful tune, and I thought the band was really at its peak when we were touring the best of Selling England, plus Foxtrot, its predecessor, and Nursery Crime. So it meant that we had these great tunes from these 2 or 3 years when Phil Collins had just joined and I'd just joined. So songs like Water of the Skies, and it really worked a treat live. It was great. We started becoming more visual in a way. We got a light show. Pete was dressing up, and we headed into this region that became known as theatrical rock. Long before people branded it as prog, we were known as quote theatrical rock, and I guess that was it. The presentation became very keen, very acute, very focused, to have this kind of ability to do something that the mellotron and the synth, this kind of expanded keyboard arsenal, that 1 minute could sound like a choir, the next minute could sound like an orchestra, then the next minute we could sound like a rock band, or allude to being a big band with Phil's influence. All of these things helped to make the band very special, I think. And Peter Gabriel, who was prepared to dress up as just about anything. And that made a big difference.
Yeah, well, speaking of Polotron, I know you guys had purchased King Crimson's Mellotron, and you had great respect for Robert Fripp and those guys. How important was that to have that element in the music at that point?
Well, I knew what a difference the Mellotron made to Crimson's stuff. It seemed to be hugely significant, as it was with the Moody Blues. I'd also seen live, so I'd seen two bands using the Mellotron to great effect live. I know that the Moody's were involved with the Chamberlain as well, which was in parallel, but it was essentially the same idea of tapes that were being driven by keys, and it was the earliest form of sampler, I believe, and I think it was invented to decode. I mean, it was almost a kind of a wartime machine used for, I think, for decoding or for storing tapes. I think it was the storage medium at first, but of course the iconic sounds of the Mellotron strings and the Mellotron flute and Mellotron brass, all those things are extraordinary things that the Mellotron does, and we still use those sounds and mix them with other things. So they mix very well with real sounds or with more modern samples, or sometimes it's just, you know, the sound of, say, Mellotron flutes, which when I first heard Strawberry Fields Forever, I just assumed they were using some ancient sounding instrument, and it has that quality of old magic about it somehow. It's beautiful, and I've used it again on something recently, and it's absolutely lovely. Whether you have it bone dry or you use effect on it, you know, it's a fantastic, it's a fantastically evocative, characterful sound. Some of these sounds were recorded way back in 1953. Apparently, it was three women in a bedroom, I think, somewhere on the East Coast, that provided the sounds for the violins on Mellotron strings that crop up on everything. They still crop up all over the place on things. Mixes very well with guitars.
Yes. Well, I know you're always looking to explore new sounds, always pushing the envelope. And I know you let your Genesis mates know during the mixing of the great live album, Seconds Out, that you were going to bow out. Was it pretty much a situation where you felt like they were accepting your, ideas less and less, and you knew you had to, go solo to blossom?
Well, it's partly true, but I think once I'd evolved to being a fully fledged songwriter, courtesy of Voyage of the Acolyte from 1975, I think the only mistake I made in doing that album was that it was a hit, and no one was expecting that. And suddenly, what is the new boy doing having a hit? So it was sometimes the very people that had helped me make the album who were criticizing me for not giving everything to the band, and so Tony and Mike said to me, "You can't have a parallel solo career whilst you're in this band." And I knew that if I wanted to get my songs recorded, I was going to have to, submit them to the band for approval. And you get to a point where composition by committee no longer works for you. Once you're fully launched and you know you can do it on your own, much as I love the band, and I think it's arguably the world's best band, but when it came to the prospect of having stillborn brain children, I had to say, well, my allegiance is is primarily to music itself, and not to the band. So loving the band's work, as I still do, and play it live and honor those early years. Beyond that, of course, I must be free to do everything weird and wonderful post that date, post 1977, which is a very long time ago.
Yeah, well, so many great solo albums since then. And like I say, 2 in this year alone. You know, how do you decide which of the past songs to put in the set? Because every year you have more and more songs to choose from. And I know you like to, you know, mix it up. So how do you choose from the past to put with the present?
Well, when I first started doing songs that featured Genesis stuff, shows, I should say, I was cherry picking across the whole of the band's history and doing the songs that I was most engaged by, the songs that I knew worked a treat live. And some of those songs are very difficult to pull off, but they sound wonderful live, provided the band can all hear each other. It makes tracks like Water of the Skies possible, or The Fountain of Salmacis, Dance on a Volcano. But since I was doing that, I had an idea of doing a Grand Slam show a while back where I would do the whole of Spectral Mornings and the whole of Selling England by the Pound. So I'd do a favorite solo album, favorite Genesis album. And 18 months ago, we released of that. So that was a kind of tour de force. I did a whole Genesis album because it was my favorite Genesis album. I felt that the band had really sort of evolved as players, and I think the music was hugely inventive. I think it was groundbreaking at the time. And subsequently, I've thought, well, I've done a whole album. Perhaps the way forward is to do the whole of Seconds Out, because that was cherry picking across many stage favorites. And so I'll be doing that live when I'm out in a couple of weeks doing these first shows for 18 months. I'm doing it in the UK, 30 dates up and down the country. The whole of Seconds Out, plus we'll do full length versions of those tunes with all the intros and outros and all the rest. So it's important to be able to do it all, really. So by album, I seem to be doing that. Of course, Surrender of Silence, the new album that I've been working on, there might be a dichotomy, you know. I mean, the response to it seems to be fantastic so far. And so I've got that thing where agents want me to do Genesis. They want me to be Genesis. Record buyers, want me to do the new stuff. So trying to keep everyone happy doing the tap dance can be quite the predicament and the embarrassment of, I wouldn't say riches, but good ideas. So I'm looking forward to playing the people, whatever I do live. God forbid I should have a hit album with Surrender of Silence, because if that happens, then that really puts the cat amongst the pigeons. But maybe I'll have to perform with two bands live, because it's like when one horse is tired, then onto the other one.
Yeah.
Me and 16, 4 hours long. Yeah. All of that sort of thing. But I get protests from the band if I do it any longer than 2.5 hours, and I've pushed them to the point sometimes when it's 2 hours 40 minutes, and with a 20-minute break, it's still a 3-hour show. So I'm not stinting on needle time live.
Well, certainly the best of both worlds. People really revere the classic era. The 70s was such a very, very special decade that continues to be the blueprint for so much music and bands, forming. And there's even, a younger generation coming up, discovering their parents' music, and loving it more than today's. But as a musician, I know it's always important to have something new, always striving for innovative new sounds. And like you say, with Surrender of Silence and the great new single, Fox's Tango, you've really pushed the envelope. And I know you've said you like to convert your detractors, give a little something to the metal people, give a little something to the to the classicals, give a little something to the jazzers, but keep a lightheartedness, keep a little bit of humor in there. I think
Yeah.
it's important to mix it up, a hybrid of all.
Yeah, I think maybe the pandemic, if there's any positive side to it, it's the fact that it's allowed me to reinvent what I do. A track like Fox's Tango, I wouldn't have done at one time, but it is closer to metal than anything else. It's heavy. There's social comment. I did the vocal myself, but people keep asking who's the singer on it because it doesn't sound like me. But the truth is, it was an excuse to have a rant about things in life I'm not happy with inequality in the world, but also to have a rant on the guitar as well, and to blast off and to tear into it and really go for it. So I'm surprised there's been response to that as a single, because to do a credible single can be at one time, GTR, when I was in my mid-30s, Steve Howe and I were roughly the same age at that point, and we were just young enough to be acceptable for MTV. That's it, the young band. But here I am, all these years later, and it's like, what is a credible single for someone of my vintage, right? And so maybe anger never really goes away, and that's really where rock comes in. And if something is angry and heartfelt, that's good too. But we want that energy. That's good.
Yeah, we need it all. It's a mixture that really makes the world go round. But I know, speaking of Steve Howe, you've had the blessings of being able to play with people like Queen's Brian May, and of course Zeppelin's John Paul Jones, and Yes's Chris Squire, and so many incredible people. And we've lost the greats, like Chris Squire. We just lost Charlie Watts. How important it is to keep their spirit alive, because I know they've influenced so many people, and it's their music must live on.
Yes, I mean, you mentioned friends that I've worked with, some of whom have passed on, the late great John Wetton. One has to hope that there's some kind of spiritual dimension and a big gig in the sky, as Floyd say. There has to be this big jam session with all the greats somehow at some point, with everyone getting a chance to tell their side of the story. It's sobering knowing that Charlie is now gone. He was a great player and a great jazz drummer. I think his first love was jazz. I get the feeling that perhaps he would have preferred to be playing in a jazz club to a few aficionados who got what he was doing and what he was capable of doing, as opposed to playing to stadiums full of young girls who were young enough to be his granddaughters. I know he was complaining about that. He was, I think he was the least starry of all of them, really. I think the star was the music for him. So he was the real thing, and I absolutely loved him. And I when I was a kid, I wanted to look exactly like him. I thought he had this sort of face that personified the idea of the stones. These chiseled features that he had in the early days, almost as if he could have been from a remote tribe, somewhere in North America. He looked like he could have been an Indian chief, somebody of great integrity and belief. I think he was the real thing.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And the fact that his love for jazz really added something special, to the Stones. I mean, it's hard to remember a time without Charlie Watts, on the drum stool for the Stones. They go back so far. A lot of people don't realize the Beatles broke up, over 50 years ago, and the Stones are still doing it. And I'm sure they'll tour in Charlie's honor. They were already prepared to tour without him coming up. So I'm sure it will be a great tribute. And, his music definitely lives on. Well, Surrender of Silence is the new album. We want everybody to go check that out. And of course, Under a Mediterranean Sky, the album that came out at the beginning of the year. So 2 in the same years, quite prolific. I know without touring in between, gave you that opportunity to, keep working, and want everybody to go out in the UK and check out those dates. And hopefully next year you can get some US dates. We would love to see you stateside, and certainly you have so many admirers.
I should be back. I should be back. Pandemic willing, we will be back. As soon as we get the green light, we'll be doing that. I'll be wearing, when I go out to restaurants and mixing with people, I wear a mask still, at least until we sit down, until we get the food. That's what goes on. So there's that for me, and I've decided I've had the vaccines. I've been vaccinated twice. My mother uses the word vaxicuted. Have you been vaxicuted? And I've been vaxicuted twice. I'll probably get a booster later in the year. I'm going to be doing that because I believe that it's worth the risk doing that. I'd rather have that than the risk of catching this damn thing, which can really wipe you out big time.